Hey everybody, there's a talk that I want to do at various meetups and conferences, and I wanted to find a way to allow me to practice the talk so that when I ended up doing it in front of a live audience, I didn't stumble, didn't stutter, didn't go over myself and kind of get lost. And I figured great way to do that is just to record the talk, stick it on YouTube, get some feedback on it. So that's what this is. This is going to be a talk that I'll be doing at meetups and conferences, and you get to see a sneak peek of it. The exchange for the sneak peek is that you're going to have to deal with my ums and ahs a lot more than I normally would, and I'd love to get your feedback. So please give me a message on LinkedIn or on YouTube or wherever else you talk to me. So let's get into the talk. So this is a talk on Zeno, and Zeno is a tech leader, Athens to algorithms. For those of you who don't know Zeno, he's somebody who is attributed with coming up with the idea of Stoicism, which is an ancient Greek philosophy. We're going to delve into what that means. We're going to discuss who Zeno is. We're going to discuss what Stoicism is and how those two things interact with the world of technology leadership. Hopefully, I'll show you how the ancient art of Stoicism tells us how we should be rational decision makers, how we can have focus on the importance of emotional resilience in our jobs as leaders, and also how it shows us that there's an important aspect to everything we do, which is focusing on continuous self-improvement. So let's get in there. Who am I? Who is this person speaking to you? I'm Andrew Murphy. I've been in this industry for quite a long time, but from a personal point of view, I'm a long-time father of a flock of chickens and a short-time father of a flock of humans. And from what I like to do as a hobby, I love travel. It's something that I just spend as much time as I possibly can getting out there and seeing the world. And for a long time, I've had the target of visiting 2 new countries every year. It's what I've always tried to do. And up until the last few years, for obvious reasons, that's been pretty hard for me to accomplish. Although 2023 so far, I visited 3 new countries, so I'm back on track. Hopefully, I can make up for some of that lost number over the next few years. From a professional point of view, I've been in the industry for almost 20 years at this point. Started off as a software engineer, learned the skills of leadership pretty early. I had the misfortune of being somebody who was pushed into a leadership position very early in my career. And I say misfortune because I really didn't know what I was doing as a leader. I wasn't somebody who truly understood the importance of leadership and how to be a great leader. And so I made a whole heap of mistakes early on in my leadership journey and learnt from those mistakes. And what I do now is I focus on training and teaching people to not make the same mistakes that I did, to learn from my experiences and the experiences of the rest of the industry in what it means to be a technology leader, the skills and the mindsets, the tool sets that are useful to being a leader in technology. And that is why I launched a company and a training course and a community called Tech Leaders Launchpad, which is just focused on helping everybody who is in that first technology leadership job understand what it means to be a leader and equip them with the skills and the tools that they need to be effective. And that's what I do now as a full-time job. I focus on helping people that were like I was 10, 15 years ago. But let's focus on the meat of what we're here to talk about today, which is Zeno. So Zeno was somebody who lived in about 300 BC, and he was a philosopher. Ancient Greece had a lot of philosophers, and we owe a lot of our modern philosophy to a huge number of people that talked about this stuff many thousands of years ago and tried to get an understanding of what it means to be human and what it means to be a good human. And that was what Zeno focused on. He was born on an island called Cyprus, which is one of my favorite places in the world. I've been to Cyprus many, many times. and Cyprus is famous for being in the middle of the Mediterranean, close to the Middle East, and kind of being this place that Greece was able to use as a foothold for many incursions, and they built a great many ships on Cyprus, and that's what this image in the top right is the docks in which they launched those many ships. But Zeno was a philosopher that had many different things attributed to him, and attributed to the people that he worked alongside closely. The three that I want to pick on to discuss are depicted in the bottom three images here. The first one, if you don't speak ancient Greek, that says logos, which is translated as logic, pretty much the idea that we can break things down and discuss their smaller elements and then build them back up again to be the larger whole, which as software engineers is obviously something that we should resonate with very deeply. This is pretty much what we do as a job. We take a complex problem, we break it down into its smaller elements, and then build it back up again. So that's not a new idea. It's something that's literally been here. Secondly, so if you know your cocktails, may not know where the word cosmopolitan comes from, but it comes from Zeno and his teachings, which is the idea of being a citizen of the world, being somebody who is a global citizen or a cosmos citizen. And he wanted this idea that we transcended the places we live, the places we're born, and we are a member of the human race over and above everything else. And we should be able to live, to work, to travel, to see any part of the world. As an English person who now lives in Australia, you can bet that I 100% agree with that philosophy. Getting out there and seeing the world is something that's incredibly important to me, and it's something that I encourage everybody to do. I think as a race, we only get better through spending time with each other and experiencing life in other people's way of living life. I genuinely believe that it's one of the great pleasures in the world is to spend time living somebody else's life. And lastly, this is my Stoicism in a single image picture, which I love. And Zeno was also responsible for coming up with a great number of practices around Stoicism, which is what we're here to discuss. So let's go into Stoicism. So Stoicism has three elements that are important to it, and it's all about building what they call eudaimonia, which is could be translated in a few different ways. The most literal translation is happy inner demon, which is, it doesn't mean much in our modern language, but effectively you can translate it a bit more loosely as a higher self, or internal spirit, being happy internal spirit, which you can translate even more loosely as being the best that you can be. That's really the essence of Stoicism, is trying to be the best human you can possibly be. And you do this through various different elements. The three most important elements are to focus on what you can control. And we'll keep coming back to this because this is one of the core tenets of Stoicism: focus on what you can control, and the difference between the things that you can control and what you can't control, and which of those are important. And so by focusing on what you control, there's effectively two things you can do with that. There are actions you can take, and there are judgments you can make. So the judgments you can make we'll go into, but effectively you should take responsibility for those judgments. And then the actions you should take should lead you towards this arete, which is to be the best possible person you can be, this excellence of humanity concept. So that's probably a little bit high level, and let's kind of delve into that a little bit just to get a sense of what that means. But in essence, this is the core concepts of Stoicism, that no matter what happens to us, we should focus on the things we should control, we should take responsibility for the judgments that we make, and we should live with arete by expressing our best self into the world. At this point, you're probably asking the question, great, interesting, what does this have to do with tech leadership? And you would probably be right in asking me that, because I have spent a good 10 minutes of your time and not driven into what I said I was going to do, which is we're all at the Athens part and we're not at the algorithms part. So let's delve into that. So let's take each of these three core tenets and look at how they apply to tech leadership. The first is focus on what you can control. What we mean by this is we have to have a definition of the things we can control and the things we can't control. Otherwise, how can we focus on what we control rather than what we can't? Well, one way to look at this is the Stoicism concept that we can only control our actions, reactions, and attitudes. We can't control things that are external, and we can't necessarily control our instinctual reactions to things. So we can control the things that we do and say and think about other things, but we can't necessarily control what other people say, do, or think. Now, you might look at this and go, well, isn't this in opposition to the idea of leadership, where you, in essence, want to influence and control the people around you? And in some ways, yes, and in other ways, no. This is called the dichotomy of control for that reason. We like to categorize things as Stoics into these two categories. Now, the wisdom in Stoicism and why this isn't in conflict with the idea of leadership is that when you have two things you can control, when you have two things that you're trying to decide what should I spend my time on, focus on spending the most time and energy on the things you can directly control as opposed to the things you can't control. And the things you can directly control are your actions, reactions, and attitudes. So, in terms of how that applies to leadership, let's take a look at what that means. So, in our control is our ability to manage our teams effectively ourselves. This is something we can do. We can have strategies and techniques and mindsets that are productive in managing our teams. We can constantly develop them and their skills. These are actions, reactions, and attitudes that we can take. We can actively spend time developing somebody else's skills. This is something that we have control over. And we can build environments that drive innovation. So by working with other people to build these environments that drive innovation, we're exercising control over the things that we can do by our actions. However, when we look at the things that are not in our control, these are things such as team dynamics, when you join your team, so when you inherit a team, understanding that what exists now is not something that was in your control, really helps you kind of accept things as they are and go, this wasn't something I created, therefore I'm not going to waste time and energy focusing on that, when I can go, okay, how do I manage this team effectively? How do I move from where they are now to where they need to be in the future so that they can constantly develop their skills, and I can build an environment that drives innovation. We also can't control market trends, or client or user decisions, or the broader economic climate. We definitely should aim to influence these things where possible through the work that we do, but these aren't things that, given the choice of where to spend our time, we should be preferencing. Like, we should seek to understand these things, but not necessarily directly impact them. If we have emotional energy to spend, or we have time to spend, we should focus on the things that are within our control as opposed to the things that are not in our control. We should take a realistic acceptance of where things are. If we do this, Stoicism says that we can lead with a clearer mind, we can focus on the things that truly matter, and all of that stress and frustration of not being in control of these things should go away, and we can focus our time, energy, and emotional well-being on those other things. So this is what I refer to as rational decision making, where an understanding the things that are truly in our control, and we're applying them to our decision making process, and we're not spending time and energy focusing on things that are not within our control. Next is the concept of taking responsibility for your judgments. And here I want to really separate the difference between the events themselves and the judgments that we make about those events. So events can trigger emotional response, but it's not the event that triggers that emotional response. It's the judgment we make about that event. If two people seeing the same event can have a completely different emotional reaction, then it's not the event that is triggering that emotional reaction. It's the judgment about what that event means. This is something that I teach when I talk about influence and how you should use your understanding of somebody else's emotional state to evoke other emotions in them, and trying to understand their internal narrative about the world, how that can evoke an emotional response. A story we can tell to illustrate this is, imagine a room full of salespeople, and they're all celebrating the fact that they smashed their numbers this quarter, and everybody's really happy about this. But over in the corner of the room is the lead salesperson, and she's not particularly happy. She's looking a bit upset. So we've got two people who have exactly the same information. We've got a group of people who interpret this smashing of the quarter as a really, really happy thing, and one person who interprets the smashing of the quarter as not particularly happy event. And you can ask yourself, why? Why are they interpreting this differently? Well, the pretty obvious why the bunch of people are celebrating, they smashed their numbers, they're all going to get their bonuses, they're going to get all their commission, they're really, really happy. The lead salesperson, she could be in a situation where she's potentially fearing for what this means for her. And historically, her sales numbers were really, really high. Everybody else's sales numbers were lower, and the gap has been closed between those two. And so she's looking at the same data and she's interpreting it through a different internal narrative. And so her judgment about the event is different, and so it triggers a different emotional response. So if we accept the fact that it's not the events themselves that trigger these emotional responses, it's our judgment about those events, then that means that we have the power to reassess these events, change our judgments, and generate different positive emotional responses to these events. So, for example, if we look at a project and that project is massively behind, we might look at that as a huge setback, and we might be frustrated and angry and, negatively respond to the people around us. And another way we could look at that is that this is great. This is an opportunity to assess what went wrong and to look at what we can do and what we can improve, and we can take a more positive mindset to this. And so the same event again can trigger different emotional responses through the judgments that we make about it. And so the key here is, what we're really trying to do is build emotional resilience. We're trying to look at how we can make judgments about events that mean that we have positive emotions against this. We should take responsibility for the judgments that we're making about events and seek to understand where those judgments come from, and question if the emotion and the reaction that these judgments make are positive and productive for what we're trying to achieve, or if we should reassess them and try and have a different judgment about the circumstance. So we're building emotional resilience. So our last concept of Stoicism that I want to cover is the concept of live with arete, by expressing our best self. Those of you who speak Greek will probably tell me that I have horribly mispronounced that word, and you would likely be correct. Arete, in essence, means excellence or virtue, but the phrase live with arete means something slightly different. It means expressing your best self. It means constantly trying to make that best self better and to live up to your potential. That's what this tenet of Stoicism means. And the way that we do that, how do we embody arete as technology leaders, is by being empathetic and constantly learning to be better at what we do. This is how we live with Arete. Our roles as technology leaders means having to balance the needs of the team with the needs of the business, with our own needs and the needs of the users, which requires a whole heap of empathy and understanding. And the way that we can be our best self is by really focusing on that understanding, by focusing on being empathetic to everybody around us and fostering this culture in our teams. By showing our teams that this is how we live our lives and this is how we want them to live their lives, we can encourage this environment of constant empathy. And secondly, this idea of learning and development and becoming better at what we do, we need to show this to the people around us. We need to set an example for others to follow. If we view ourselves as already the best version of who we are, then we're not going to be setting an example of how to improve and how to get better. And so we should be showing an example of how we develop, how we improve, how we are constantly striving to live with Arete, how we are constantly striving to be our better self. And so this is this concept of continual self-improvement that I was talking about, asking ourselves the question of how do we become better? How do we improve ourselves? So that's my talk. It's a pretty quick talk, a lightning talk, if you will, on the concepts of Stoicism in technology leadership and how the ancient arts that were discussed well over 2,000 years ago can apply in a modern concept. What is old is new again. Like I said in the beginning, part of what I'm doing now as a job is focusing on developing and helping leaders who are taking their first step into technology leadership, understand what that means, and giving them the concepts and the ideas, the mindsets and the tool sets that will help them be effective in what they do. If you want to learn more about that, scan the first QR code and that'll give you a sign-up form where you can be added to my newsletter to get updated about when this is going to get launched. We're aiming for mid-August. If you just want to connect with me in general, I do these random talks from time to time. I talk about this kind of stuff. It's what I like to do. It's what brings me the most joy. If you want to just connect on LinkedIn and follow what I do, then you can scan the second QR code there. If you've got any questions, please post them in the chat below and we'll get to them and I'll get back to you. So thank you very much for listening to me talk about Athens to algorithms, Zeno as a tech leader. I'll see you next time.